Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick.
I'm Ian.
So today we're looking way back in the past. Now that we're in 2024, we're looking 30 years back.
Oh my goodness.
I know. It seems like just yesterday, but it was 30 years ago. But today we're looking at some of the best albums, or some of our favorite albums from 1994. There's a bunch of links down below. Make sure you go check them out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that we put together every week, and the Patreon page. Make sure you go check all that out. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give us a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time we release new episodes. So 1994 overall was an absolutely incredible year for music. I turned 15 that year.
16.
You turned 16 that year.
Got my driver's license.
Yeah, so there's so many other great albums that we could have discussed in this video, but we're limited by time. So make sure you drop us a comment down below. Let us know what some of your favorite albums from 1994 are, because there's only 8 or so albums we're going to talk about today. And I think I had like a list of 10 or 15 albums that I even considered for the video today.
And for me, it's probably a matter of like all the ones I didn't even think of.
Oh, I'm sure. This is a lot of stuff was just kind of off the top of my head. The one album that I remember when this album came out, it was huge. It was all over the place. It was several years later, though, before I even listened to this album.
I bought it when it came out.
Oh, did you?
On CD, yeah.
And it's a fantastic album. It's an album by one of my favorite bands of all time. And that is The Division Bell by Pink Floyd. And this is like the last like real Pink Floyd album before this was The Wall. I know, they released a couple albums in between, but Richard Wright wasn't involved, and when they reformed after Roger Waters left the band, and they did Momentary Lapse of Reason, it was more of a David Gilmour solo album. This is like the full return of the band. And this is what Pink Floyd really should have been post Roger Waters. This is what they could have been with Momentary Lapse of Reason. Richard Wright was finally a restored member of the band. There was collaboration between all three of the members, and it really it all came together on this album. And is this one of their best albums in my opinion? I'd probably put it in there. Maybe the 6, 7, or 8 spot as far as their discography goes. It is a good album. I think it's just a notch behind like Dark Side of the Moon, The Wall, Wish You Were Here, those kind of albums.
Well, a different era too. I mean, it's it's hard to recapture some of that originality, at this point, 15, 20 years later. But I really enjoyed the album, and I've made it very clear that I'm not the biggest Pink Floyd fan.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed this album. Like I said, I bought it right when it came out, and it's a good album. It definitely, I think, is.
And it stands up, even 30 years later.
Oh, absolutely. I just recently listened to High Hopes. It came up in my Spotify randomness, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a really good song. And that doesn't happen very often. For some reason, Pink Floyd doesn't show up in my list, and it was really weird that it did. But yeah, it's a good album, and really kind of. I remember when it came out, like you said, it was all over the place.
There's a bunch of hype about it.
And first time I heard about it, so it was my English class. Every Friday, the teacher would bring in newspapers, and we had to read newspapers. And there was a big article in the entertainment section about this album. That's how I found out about it. So I remember that day. I remember reading that article. I even ripped it out of the paper and kept the article for a while.
Yeah.
So for my first one, and these aren't in any particular order, Vitology by Pearl Jam. Both of us have made it very clear that we are big Pearl Jam fans. And this is their third album.
Yes.
And it was like every album, I wouldn't say this is a better album than Versus, but it's a better album than 10. So there was always a progression.
I think it's a different album.
It is. 10. And I think that's kind of what it is. It's more of a progression. They were, becoming more focused. I think there's a bit more focus on this album. I think there was a bit more focus on Versus as well. Like I said, I'm not sure if I'd say Versus this is better than Versus. It's two sides of the same coin maybe for me, but Vitology, it's a great album. It's one that I go back to all the time nowadays.
This was like the album that for a long time I really considered this like the last great Pearl Jam album. I've definitely changed my opinion since then, but for I would say for probably a good 10-year span, I kind of considered that like the end of that great period for Pearl Jam. But
I really, I mean, maybe you can kind of even look at it, maybe not necessarily the last great, but the last of that early version of Pearl Jam.
yeah,
I think every band has kind of that early era where the things that come after aren't lesser, but they're different.
yeah.
And this, you're right, this might be the last of that early
Period from
Pearl Jam, that early 90s. I mean, it really was.
So 1994 was a really interesting year for music because you had this big transition. You had basically the death of grunge and the birth of the alternative scene and punk rock and all these. I think rock really splintered in a bunch of different directions with the death of Kurt Cobain and the scene really, the music scene really changed in 1994. And an album that I think still kind of held on to some of that grunge, even though I don't think they're a grunge band,
No.
but still a lot of really a lot of big grunge elements to it, but still really kind of helped transition to alternative rock a little bit more in 1994. Is Purple by Stone Temple Pilots. I remember when this album came out. I loved Core. I thought Core was an incredible album, and Core, even though Core isn't really a grunge album either, it had more of those grunge elements.
It was definitely lumped in with the grunge.
Yeah.
In terms of how the mainstream viewed
and
it.
they had kind of this like Pearl Jam kind of vibe on Core that I think they grew as musicians when they recorded Purple. And I think Purple is, like I said, as much as I love Core, I think Purple is an even better album than their debut. And, it's one that I still go back through and listen pretty regularly.
So my next one is 4 by Blues Traveler. There's no argument that this is a great, great, great album. I have a very love-hate relationship with Blues Traveler these days because I don't know if they've really done a good album since Straight On Till Morning, which was the follow-up to this.
Yeah.
But this was their, I hate to say it, but their pinnacle, their zenith in terms of albums, because nothing was better after.
It's their Sgt. Pepper.
I guess if you want to,
even though I hate it when people say that,
right? Because it doesn't really. It's not.
Yeah.
It's kind of a fallacy, really. But when you look at it, nothing after this was as great as this. Although I would argue that Straight On Till Morning is a better album, but nothing after this was as great as this, and everything before this was really kind of leading up to this.
Yeah.
So, as far as the band, and I hate to pigeonhole a band, but this really is their pinnacle.
Yeah.
Whether or not they can do more now, I don't know. I think they're capable. They just haven't done it. They've done some okay stuff. They've done some good music, but it's nowhere near the quality of what you get from this. And I think this really kind of, as you were talking about splintering rock sounds, this, along with, say, Counting Crows and maybe even like
it pushed rock in a very different direction.
Kind of that, I wouldn't call it like soft rock, but it wasn't heavy as the grunge or the alternative. It was more of a straightforward, almost folk rock kind of element to it. That was kind of becoming a thing. Like I said, Counting Crows, Gin Blossoms, Blues Traveler, where they were mainstream enough, but still pushing boundaries on music. And I could go on and on about this album.
One thing I want to say about this real quick is Blues Traveler needs to reissue this. This is
Absolutely.
a bootleg.
Yes.
I'd love to have an official pressing of it.
Yeah, they reissued their first 3 albums already. So I don't understand why this one has not been reissued when it's the logical one to do a big, like even a big box set of.
Maybe we'll see a big 30th anniversary release.
Hey, I'm all for it because they need to, and I don't know why they haven't yet.
Yeah. So for me, I can't talk about 1994 without talking about punk music because it was huge. It was the year that punk music really got back into the mainstream. It was absolutely huge. There's a couple of really big albums. I will kind of, say that the rest of my list or the rest of the albums I'm going to talk about are all they're the albums that really kind of formed that mainstream punk music in 1994. At least
you could almost do a whole episode just on that. Really.
I'm actually considering. I'll probably do one in 2024. Kind of go over a lot of those great albums from 1994. But the first one I got to talk about is Let's Go by Rancid. This is an album that Rancid, of course, was born out of Operation Ivy. They were trying to do, with Operation Ivy, there's a little bit more of a ska punk influence there. And they tried to kind of move on and do more of like a straightforward punk album with Let's Go. And I don't think it's their best album, but this is the album that would kind of lead them into And Out Come the Wolves and Life Won't Wait and all the other great albums that they would release after that one. But this is a great beginning for that band.
My next one, I have a copy of it. I forgot to bring it with me. So Nick will have a picture here somewhere.
Yeah, right about here.
Right somewhere in this general vicinity.
Yeah.
But it's The Last Temptation by Alice Cooper. It was a follow-up to Hey Stupid, which is actually one of my favorite Alice Cooper albums. But Last Temptation is unique in that it is kind of Alice's little foray into slightly grungy music or alternative music, rock. Because it isn't the kind of hair metal-y thing that he was doing before. It's definitely different than anything that came after. And a lot of the songs were co-written by Chris Cornell.
Yeah.
And he does sing backup on a couple of songs
of the
as
tracks,
well.
yeah.
But he co-wrote a lot of the songs as well. So, and it's very evident in the music. And I think it makes the album stand out because I think if that element wasn't there, if it was more of just even all the thematic elements there, but more of a Hey Stupid kind of thing, I don't think it would have worked.
No.
It makes it kind of unique and makes it its own thing. And I mean, there's a whole thing. It was a concept album with a comic book and everything. But musically speaking, it's a great album. And I think it was, again, Alice just doing something different. And it worked because he's done different things in other albums that didn't work. This is where it worked. And I think Chris Cornell's influence on the album made a huge difference.
It's probably one of my favorite solo Alice Cooper albums.
Yeah, it's definitely up there for me. It's going to be in any top 10 tier list of Alice Cooper album. It's always going to be in there. Yeah. And he's coming up on his 30th release. So, when you say top 10, that means
That's
something.
A lot, yeah.
It means something. So,
another one of those great punk albums that was released in 1994 that. This is kind of along the same lines as The Division Bell, where I didn't listen to this album. So it came out in 94. It was probably early 96, I think, when I listened to it the first time. And, it's been one of my most played albums since it was first released. I remember the first time I heard it was probably shortly after I heard it. I bought it on CD. I was driving around with my boss for the place I worked at the time. And he was like, what the hell are you listening to? What is this album? And it's Punk and Drublic by NoFX. You got songs like Don't Call Me White and, The Bruise are on here. There's like so many great classic NoFX songs on here that, if you're not familiar with NoFX, you've never listened to them before, I guess I can understand. Obviously, it's not like their album that came out before this where there's a little bit more questionable songs on that album. This is some of the songs, there's more like radio-friendly tracks that we played on this album, but it's still very different than anything else, I think, or a lot of the other stuff that was coming out in 1994.
I just like that NoFX always had, at least especially back then, there was humor.
Yes,
it was
and
light,
I think that's kind of the big thing.
And that's what I always liked.
They're a band that never took themselves seriously, and that really comes through on this album.
Right. So the last one I have, again, will be a picture here, but it has not been released on vinyl, so I wouldn't have had a vinyl copy to show you anyway. But it's When I Woke by Rusted Root. It was technically their second album. Their first one was Cruel Sun, which really was more of just like a compilation of EPs, kind of like with Green Day's first album. But it was their first, so we'll call it their first official full LP. Send Me On My Way was a huge track for that year. It was all over the place. And it was very different from everything else that was going on. It was very kind of hippie kind of music, 90s hippie.
Even for 1994, it was a very different kind of album.
Indeed. And very rhythm based. A lot of like drum circle kind of stuff going on. Just very different. A very different album. So it really stood out for me, and I think for a lot of people. I really wish they could have gone on and done a lot more because they really haven't done much.
It would have been interesting to see where the band would have went from that album.
I mean, they continued to make albums up until 2012. But
I don't feel it was like quite. I don't know. It was just something different about that one album.
Well, when we do our 2026 review of 1996, I'll bring up their next album, which is actually my favorite of theirs.
Yeah.
But that's a couple years off. But yeah, When I Woke, if you haven't listened to it, check it out. It's really good album. It's on Spotify.
I just picked it up on CD not too long ago.
Yeah, I need to rebuy my CD because I don't have it anymore. But it's definitely one I need to rebuy. Yeah. Or if anyone in Rusted Root's listening, it would be nice to get a vinyl reissue of that. Well, it's never been on vinyl. So a vinyl pressing of that would be very nice.
Yeah. And then last but not least, an album that, I can't talk about. Not only can I not talk about 1994, I can't talk about punk music without this album. And it's one I'm sure you'll agree with also.
Absolutely. I agree with your last few too.
Yeah.
So.
The album is Dookie by Green Day. So I think this came out February 1st, 1994, so early part of the year. That's why I thought it was funny that they released the 30th anniversary box set in 2023. Yeah. But this was the album that really kind of broke punk in the mainstream. It is the highest selling punk album of all time. Sold, I think, over 22 or 23 million copies. It was just everywhere. And this album, obviously there's other punk bands, Offspring, NoFX, Rancid. They were doing other things, punk prior to this album. But this was the album that really opened up punk music to a whole new audience and really kind of made that like mid-90s punk scene, I think, really what it was.
Well, I don't know if it really is the thing, but it was the first time you saw punk on MTV.
Yeah.
For whatever
on heavy rotation.
On heavy rotation, correct. And it was in your face. It was right there. And, again, there was the humor element to it, but a little bit more serious, too, I think.
Longview, I mean, I swear Longview was played on MTV every 30 minutes.
Yeah.
When I Come Around
was
Case.
Yeah, I mean, all those, you could almost set your watch to them, a lot of them. But Longview, definitely. Welcome to Paradise was another one. That was more radio play, though. I don't know if there was, I don't remember there being a video for that one.
I think there was.
That was on the radio just as much as the other songs, for sure. So yeah, for me, it was my first experience seeing it on MTV, where it wasn't just a Sex Pistols thing or a Ramones thing. Yeah. Don't get me wrong, I love the Ramones, but it was for my era, for my age group.
Yeah. Well, that's all we got for today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop us a comment down below. Let us know what some of your favorite albums from 1994 are. I don't know why I stumbled over that, but there's a ton of them. I mean, obviously, I could have went on and on. I could do a top 20 or top 30 list.
Yeah, we could even do this in volumes. This is volume 1. Volume 2 of 1994 records.
Because there's just so many of them. It's just, like I said before, music was 1994 was a big transition period for music, and it was just a really great year overall. But let us know what you guys think. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give us a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all we got. Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Keep on spinning. Peace.